Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Friday, July 1st, 2023 Nantucket Historical Commission meeting. I'll begin by checking in with who is attending. George Butterworth. As I call your name, just acknowledge so that everyone knows you're here. Thank you so much, George, and welcome. And next we have Rita Carr.
Yeah.
Welcome. Clement Durgus.
Here.
Thank you. Abby Demolina.
Here.
Hi. Tom Montgomery.
Here.
Welcome. And Mickey Rowland.
Here.
We also have our staff liaison, Holly Backus. Thank you. And we have guests today from Preservation Institute Nantucket. Clary, thank you for coming, and we're looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you for having us.
And I didn't catch Erica.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Are you helping in the presentation?
No.
Okay.
Erica is my doctoral assistant, so
Okay.
you'll be seeing us for the next 4 years together.
We have Mary Bergman in the room with us. Thank you. And we've got Hillary Report. Hi. And do we, oh, we've got Kimberly Rose.
Hi.
Welcome. Have I missed anyone? Nice to have such a group today. Well, first order of business is electing our officers, as this is the first meeting that we've had since the new appointments. So for the new commissioners, welcome. Thank you for applying and joining. I guess we should just start with the chair. Does anyone have any nominations for chair?
I'd like to nominate Angus as the chair. Seconded.
Do we have any other nominations? Well, then let's go ahead and vote on that. Sounds like we have a nomination, a second. And so let me go around. George? Aye. Abby?
Aye.
Rita?
Aye.
Clement?
Aye.
Well, I accept. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Who did I miss there? Oh, they started it off, but Tom,
Aye.
you, Mickey.
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right. So next is vice chair. Do I have
I'd
any?
like to nominate Rita Carr for vice chair.
I'll second that.
Okay. George?
Aye.
First of all, are there any other nominations? Okay, George? Aye, thank you. Clement?
Aye.
Thank you. Abby?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Nikki?
Aye.
And I as well. Thank you for, oh, well, Rita, would you like to, would you like to take this position? Thank you. And do we have a nomination for secretary?
I'd like to nominate Abby DeMolina, who's doing an excellent job.
Great, Mickey?
That's an aye for me, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. And George?
Aye.
Rita?
Aye.
And I as well. Thank you so much, Abby.
No problem.
All right. So let's move on to the approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes. One is the last meeting we had, the June meeting. And then we'll go on to CLG. So for the June meeting, do we, would someone like to move the approval of the minutes?
I move the minutes be approved as submitted.
Clement was doing that the same, so we have a second, all in favor, George?
Aye.
Abby?
Aye.
Rita?
Aye.
And I as well.
Aye.
Thank you, Mickey. And so we'll move on to the 2021 CLG meeting minutes. Would anyone like to?
Mr. Chair, before the commission votes, I just wanted to mention that I know on here it said that Holly was going to review. Holly hasn't had time to review, so my apologies, but I didn't know how busy I am.
Okay,
It's up to you.
would anyone like to move approval of the minutes from our CLG meeting from 2021?
I move that we approve the minutes from the CLG meeting as submitted.
Thank you, Tom. Do I have a second? Thank you, Clement. All in favor, say aye. George?
Aye.
Thank you. Abby?
Aye.
Rita?
Aye.
Mickey?
Aye.
And I as well. Thank you all. And now we'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment?
No, I had a comment, but it's actually kind of on the agenda, so you can find my commenting.
When it comes up?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, well, sorry for the delay, and we've been looking forward to this presentation. So, Claire, if you want to take over, please.
Great. Well, good morning. I just wanted to introduce myself quickly before we begin the presentation. My name is Clary Larkin. I am the new director of the University of Florida's Historic Preservation Program. And also that means I'm the director of Preservation Institute Nantucket, which is a thrill. So this is my second year as director of Penn, but I had been coming up to Nantucket for many years with previous director Marty Hilton. So, had a great opportunity to get to know Nantucket a little bit, work with groups like the town and NPT. And I'm just really excited to take on this position and to hopefully build and maintain relationships with you all throughout the year. I'd like to also introduce Erica Mullen, who is my doctoral research assistant. She and I will be working on Penn for the next 4 years that she is funded for her PhD. So you will see us up here every summer. And then I'll be coming up throughout the year as well. And hopefully getting back to working with the town and NPT on more CPC grants, which has been, I know, a lot of projects that Marty and Kim took on in the previous years. So this presentation is a little bit delayed, for which I apologize, but this was a grant that was developed as a partnership with Penn and NPT, and Kim Rose, who was co-director last year and really the project manager and the leader for this project. So she's really going to give the presentation today. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. We have submitted the full report last fall, and we're happy to share this presentation as well. So Kim, I pass it over to you. Great to see you again.
Good to see you. Good to see everybody. I love the panoramic view of the room. So I'm just going to share my screen. I do have a presentation, and let me know if it comes up correctly. Hopefully it does.
Good. That's good.
Fantastic. Okay. So hello, my name is Kimberly Rose. I am presenting on the Historic Streetscapes Preservation Master Plan. A little bit about me, like Clary said, I was the co-director of the Preservation Institute Nantucket for 2 years. But I lived on Nantucket since 2020. I now live in Boston and work for the Craig Group Partners as their preservation manager. So just to give an idea of what I will cover in this presentation today, I'm going to recognize those who had a hand in helping with this grant, as well as a very brief project overview, context statement, a review of the outcomes of a visual preference survey we completed, considerations, and a conclusion. First, thank you to the Nantucket Community Preservation Committee for supporting our research through grant funding. We greatly appreciate it. The Nantucket Athenaeum for hosting the first public engagement event. The Nantucket Historical Commission for your support throughout and for hosting the second event. To our project partner, the Nantucket Preservation Trust, for answering my sometimes odd questions. And of course, to Holly for advice and connections to those I need to speak to, and to Hillary for her research on the topic and suggestions for research avenues. On the UF side, thank you to Dr. Larkin for your editing talents, Dr. Kim for coming to Nantucket to help digitally document the sidewalks, and Dr. Chen for processing all of that data. And finally, thank you to our 2021 Penn students, Elena and Elizabeth, for your free time, rain or shine, helping me measure each curbstone and entire sidewalks during the summer. I do want to remind you that this is the second public presentation. The first one is housed on the Nantucket Athenaeum's YouTube page for your viewing pleasure. The first presentation goes into much more detail about the history of the street studied, as well as the observations from the digital and manual research. For the sake of time, I'm not going to review that extensive history, but instead just briefly touch on bits and pieces as relevant to our discussion. So as Clary stated, the goal of this project was to document the streetscapes with the goal of developing strategies and plans to address maintenance, code issues, and the requirements of ADA. With the help of Elena and Elizabeth, we were able to manually document all of the sidewalks on Winter Street and the north side of Liberty Street, where it intersects with Walnut. Then Dr. Kim and I documented the east sidewalk of Center Street, as you can see in the bright blue, green, teal color. I'm colorblind, sorry. And I forgot what color I chose. And we also did the digital documentation of the south sidewalk of Liberty Street, once again to that intersection of Walnut Street. The manual documentation took 6 weeks. The digital documentation took 2 days. Similar to the Nantucket Historic Landmark, Nantucket streets have evolved over time. The changes that occur to the streetscape stem from various infrastructure needs, from the Department of Public Works to electricity and internet suppliers, as well as just nature and time. Many changes to the streetscape reflect a singular goal or priority, most often not considering the holistic value of the streetscape itself. Coordination of project priorities and general maintenance with a holistic framework can create streetscapes that are historically appropriate, as well as accessible and safe for the public, while including all the modern day conveniences that we love and accesses to those infrastructures. This report builds upon the work completed by other historic districts in the United States, but also leading documents published for Dublin, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. And in my research, every national and international document I came across about sidewalks were unified by 5 common goals. So that first goal is inclusivity. Often diversity and inclusion are used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Diversity does not equal inclusion. Diversity is the presence of difference, and you can have a person in a wheelchair at an event, but if they cannot access the microphone, like somebody who's not in a wheelchair, that event is diverse, but it's not inclusive. Inclusion is the accepting, respecting, and valuing of diversity, and it requires intention. In a recent training I attended with the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, the trainer put it this way: diversity is being invited, inclusivity is being able to participate, and equity is being on the committee. The concept of inclusivity also applies to sidewalks. We want everybody to be able to use a public sidewalk. Changes such as tree growth, which we can't necessarily control, and modifications and additions of utilities, which we can control, can lead to a streetscape that cannot serve an inclusive public. Designs need to be carefully orchestrated to ensure access. And necessary changes to that design process include being knowledgeable in using the Americans with Disabilities Act to guide work, working in partnership with state and local authorities on disability access to improve sidewalk inclusion, and ensuring those with disabilities have a voice and a role in enhancing access and sustaining a welcoming historic environment, remembering that inclusion requires intention. The second goal is safety. What is the purpose of a sidewalk? It is meant to facilitate movement of people and goods separated from moving vehicles. This goes all the way back to carts and wagons, such as in this image of Pompeii, which features a sidewalk above street level to create a separate and safer pedestrian space in a dense area. And look how flat those sidewalks are. There are also stepping stones so people could cross the street without stepping onto that street level. Of course, that's not ADA compliant, but I think we can give Pompeii a pass on that. But the historic purpose of that sidewalk continues today. But what happens when sidewalks fail protecting people from moving vehicles and facilitating movement? People walk less. They may drive more, creating more pollution. If they do walk, they may trip or hurt themselves more, or in the case of those who have a disability, they lose independence, they lose connection to the community, and they lose a quality of life. Streetscape design should mitigate any element that hinders safe movement. All people should be able to access and use pedestrian public space with confidence. Moving on to public health, streetscape design can also impact this through resilience and mitigation efforts, air quality, and the consideration of the tranquility of our surroundings. Urban greening and public landscape can mitigate vehicle pollution impacts on air quality. It can also mitigate the heat island effect. I know that in the summer, you're jumping from shade to shade tree, going down Main Street, and where those trees have been removed, you're running because you're trying to get to the next shade spot. But adding these urban greening and public landscapes can also add to resilience by offering spaces for water retention, coastal wave abatement, and just slowing the general movement of water as it goes down Main Street. And also, like I said, it creates a calming and enjoyable public space for pedestrians. It is shown that having green spaces, having trees along streetscapes reduces anxiety and allows people to be outdoors and find it more enjoyable. Historically, Nantucket sidewalks have been a public space for socialization, conversation, and rest. For example, Main Street streetscapes includes benches and a sidewalk that's wide enough for groups to pause for conversation while hopefully not impeding the flow of movement from other pedestrians. That's how it's supposed to work. I know that it doesn't because of human error. Other sidewalks within the historic core could also serve this purpose and improve public health by implementing appropriate designs based on historic precedent and public engagement. The fourth goal is historically appropriate aesthetics. Nantucket is a national landmark. We all know this. Preserving and maintaining the historic environment not only reflects the significance of this historic designation, but also the benefits of the community. By preserving and maintaining, I do mean the streetscapes. To sustain the significance, work would follow the Secretary of Interior standards, incorporating attention to function, aesthetics, and material, but also needs to view the sidewalk and streetscape holistically, not just in section by section that you're particularly focusing on, but all of it. And remember what is actually historically significant. And finally, we have economics. Appropriate investment into historic streetscapes bolsters heritage tourism. That is a fact. Well-designed streetscapes will be inclusive, safe, functional, comfortable, and aesthetically pleasing, while supporting safe pedestrian access and opportunities for local retail and commercial growth. Assessment of beneficial streetscape design can be undertaken through measuring pedestrian flow and economic benefits before and after a project. It has been shown that good sidewalks lead to higher commercial revenues because people are more likely to walk around and explore than drive directly to and from a destination. Additionally, deferred maintenance of streetscapes will create additive long-term expenses, while regular maintenance and upkeep, such as even relaying brick, will save money in the long term and cause less material failures, which once again saves money because you're not replacing those bricks. Moving on to the context statement, a well-developed historic context statement is a critical first step for working with historic resources, as it creates the basis for evaluating significance, focusing on character-defining elements, and providing a framework for decision-making that assists with minimizing detrimental impacts to that resource. For this streetscapes project, the context statement focuses on the design and material authenticity of the brick, the cobblestone, stone, and more, because they're important to Nantucket's evolution. Historic development and changes over time are important to document within a context statement as they illustrate the evolution of that resource to its current state. For example, concrete, once pervasive in the historic district, yet today minimally used, is a reminder that streetscapes are constantly evolving and that users define the forms and functions and appearances of these living artifacts. We as preservationists are meant to manage this change in a way that is historically respectful to that significance, but it is not realistic to freeze a resource in time, nor is it feasible. Lastly, the context statement is informed by historic research. Just as resources change over time, so too should this historic context statement. And with a continuation of research and the reassessment of previous findings. And once again, the history and development of the context statement is explained in greater depth in the report and in the first presentation. So we are halfway through this presentation. Congratulations. But we'll begin to talk about the visual preference survey, which is typically used for design and planning purposes, where participants are presented with a visual or an image and then asked to rank their preference on a scale. For this project, photos illustrated the current and historical conditions and provided a 5-point scale for ranking. The first 6 questions focused on material integrity, and the next 5 on design integrity, and the final 4 on pedestrian experiences such as safety and aesthetic preference. In the 2 weeks, the survey received 96 responses and a high response rate of 95% completion, which is something I have not seen in any survey that I've done in any community. So that's fantastic. And once again, the analysis of this can be found in the report, so I won't go into great detail, just the observations. From this line of questioning about material integrity, so they were presented with the images above. The observations we made are the closer to the perceived historic material, the better. The curbstone with carved tactile lines in the second image was found to be more favorable than the dome pavers. Perhaps researching different kinds of ADA materials will help guide the conversation, as ADA sidewalks can also be historically, aesthetically appropriate. Once again, keep in mind what is historically significant. Are those bricks and curbs so historically significant to the whole streetscape that changing them to ADA appropriate materials would hurt the overall historic character? Or, in reframing that question, are those bricks and curbs at crosswalks specifically so historically significant that they overcome a person's right to navigate their environment safely? Those are the questions that we're asking when we're looking specifically at these crosswalks. Looking further, the new granite curbs, this is a photo from when the Easy Street Park was being constructed, with the beveled edges, were found to be good. But some folks were opposed to the color, stating it was too light. Of course, that will change over time as weather and pollution and just general use expose it to the elements. There is, of course, the option of purchasing reclaimed curbstones, which would need to be suitable for the high intensity use and of course Nantucket's climate, and those cost a pretty penny. And finally, the last material I put in there just to see what would happen. It did not break my expectation. It actually met my expectations. Asphalt sidewalk, not appropriate, not historic. People hated it. However, as discussed in the previous presentation, asphalt was quite common for Nantucket sidewalks in the period of significance. However, the decision would not be unfounded to replace the asphalt with brick to match the remainder of the historic streetscape, as the asphalt is not significant enough to warrant protection. Moving into design integrity, the change in brick pattern was deemed appropriate. So this is at the crosswalk on Main Street from what is that coffee shop? Anyways, the coffee shop towards the closer to Center Street. But it was deemed appropriate by 91% of survey participants. The only detracting comment was concerned with the slope, stating that they often feel like they're falling down it instead of walking on it. And I actually went out and measured it, and it does exceed the regulations. There are two agencies that oversee the public rights of way accessibility standards in Massachusetts, and the regulations are listed in 521 Code of Massachusetts regulations. There is a common misconception also when people were answering this question about historic communities being exempt from ADA standards, and this is not the case. There is not a legacy clause under any title of ADA, and believe me, I read them all. For public sidewalks. The only thing that comes even close to it is the Department of Justice and the Code of Federal Regulations states that in historic preservation programs, a public entity shall give priority to methods that provide physical access to individuals with disabilities, unless it requires action that would, one, threaten the historic significance of a historic property, or two, cause undue financial administrative burdens. The financial and administrative burdens, since this is a public sidewalk, would not really apply. The only thing that could apply is that threatening historic significance of a property, but considering the number of crosswalks to sidewalk ratio, it's not significant enough to threaten significance to warrant not having ADA compliant crossings. Elevated sidewalks are found in 4 locations in town. Easy Street as a ramp into businesses, Broad Street by the old Easy Street Cantina, Oak Street outside of Barnaby's toy store, and Straight Wharf in front of the Thomas Macy's warehouse. Many people didn't understand the purpose of these split elevated sidewalks, as I came to call them. From my analysis, they provide 2 benefits. One is protecting the property slightly from flooding, and by creating higher ground, because all 4 of those sidewalks are in places that flood frequently. And 2, making it easier to enter the building, making those entrances ADA compliant. There are 2 issues with these, however. The state requires ramps to have handrails. All of these qualify as a ramp, none of them have handrails. The one pictured in the middle has attempted to create an area where people can't just step off the raised portion, like what I see happen all the time in front of Macy Warehouse. And what I have done, I've sprained my ankle in front of Macy Warehouse, accidentally stepping off of that curb. But by doing this, they have limited that area of movement and added more obstacles for people with mobility devices to have to try to navigate around. And clear passage is required by both state and federal regulations, and this one actually fails that regulation. And finally, there is the guardrail that blocks access to a drainage basin, which is a remnant when this design was actually open originally and was all around town. You would find these. I've found plenty of historic photos of them. And really what I found was interesting in the survey, people were not responding to the guardrail as itself, but to the lack of maintenance around it. The bricks are uneven and pulling up. The guardrail is not really necessary to protect from a large open drain anymore, and people aren't at risk of falling into it. And it's in a high traffic condensed area in front of the Pacific Club. This is an opportunity for further public engagement and education about historic features, maintenance possibilities, and determining values based on community and stakeholder feedback. Is this rail significant as a remnant of what once was Nantucket's water movement system? And then we asked about pedestrian preference. So there's 2 examples. They received 4 questions, one asking about safety rating for this area, the other asking for the aesthetics of this area. And this is the corner of Center Street and Broad Street. And this has not been touched or not been fixed recently. And people found it generally not safe. That was the largest percentage. Some people found it neutral. Almost nobody said it was safe. The aesthetic ranking, a lot of people find it charming, but a lot of the comments were said, it's charming, so I put yes, but really if it was anywhere but Nantucket, it would be a no. And so it's one of those questions of why does Nantucket get the exemption from being safe? And then there's this sidewalk in front of 31 Center Street that had its bricks relayed, had the nice wood put around the tree, and it looks lovely, and people ranked it overwhelmingly as safe. They felt safe walking this area. The aesthetic ranking, absolutely, it is aesthetically pleasing, 74%, 20% said maybe. The reason a lot of those people said maybe when looking at their responses is actually because of the stairs on the right side. They say that they jut out onto the sidewalk a little too much. I said, well, that's private property line, and not something that people can control, unfortunately. Hopefully those bushes grow up a little bit more so people are less likely to step over there. And then 6% said no. Taking all of this research and all of this public engagement into account, I came up with 3 things that are necessary: expertise, training, and context. Identify subject matter experts when need is anticipated, not when you need them, but when you anticipate their potential need. So this means arborists, preservationists, planners, engineers, disability representatives, material scientists, legal counsel, etc. Involving these people up front decreases the probability of missing details or lacking inclusion, and increases the multidisciplinary and holistic approach for streetscapes. It's giving a unified front. It's giving we are doing the right thing. Looking at training, sharing understanding of design, and ensuring those who are planning and executing and then installing those plans are aware of the materials, their functions, such as setting it into a specific type of sand, setting the bricks into sand or setting the cobblestones into sand. And proper installation practices. How should they be set? What direction should they be facing? Is there a pattern that is historically appropriate that needs to be replicated? And this will decrease the need for redundant work and dollars and time spent going back and forth. And then finally, context. Make sure, like I said, you're matching that area. Look at the area holistically. Look at what is important. Is there a specific feature, such as on Center Street, the carriage steps that needs to be reinstalled because it is historically significant, or on Main Street, the drainage stones, which are very rare. And from my research and asking other professors at other universities, they haven't seen anywhere else but Nantucket, making sure that those are installed properly to where they are functioning as well. So understanding that context is important. And there are several considerations provided, organized into 3 categories: streetscape planning, surveying and documentation, and managing change. This includes general advice as well as specific items that might be useful to Nantucket. And I pulled out just select ones from the document. There are plenty more, but for streetscape planning, you might look into historic streetscapes and tree design guidelines. So partnering with the folks that manage the town trees in Nantucket, and trying to come up with a solution for the sidewalks and how to make sure that the trees have adequate room to grow and people have adequate room to walk. An urban forest management plan, which can do a similar thing, but also it might be that you want to add more trees or add more resilience efforts in areas that flood. And that would need to involve also you all that care so much about the streets and about the sidewalks and about the historic preservation portion of it. Survey and documentation. 2 examples is locate and record particular details and arrangements such as cisterns and bollards and drainage stones for preservation. So identify those significant items. And also use digital documentation to survey vertical deviations. We didn't have a proper surveying tool. We used the laser scanning, turn the laser scan sideways to look at the slope and the bumps and all of the weird things that are happening with Nantucket sidewalks in certain places, which was difficult to detect looking at it and just measuring with a tape measure, unless you pulled up the level or got a level on your phone. And finally, managing change. So looking at sections that might need to be leveled if they exceed the variation set by ADA or the Code of Massachusetts regulations. But if that sidewalk is within that variation, if there's not a big bump or big hole in the sidewalk, then no work should occur beyond basic maintenance. And then also retain the original fabric, and where changes are necessary, keep them to a minimum. So try to create those matching ADA compliant things. Try to make sure that the bricks you are getting match in color, match in size. Try to make sure that the curbs that you're getting are matching in size. They will eventually match in color. It just depends on where they're quarried from. But doing those things can help reduce the amount of work. And so in conclusion, streetscapes do not exist in a vacuum. And by creating safe, welcoming, and accessible opportunities, the door is open for retail and commercial growth as people are able to enjoy all the town has to offer. Streetscapes are the arteries of town, both historically and today. And no one wants arteries with obstructions or clogs. When looking at the history of Nantucket streets, it was apparent that even in hardship and economic declines, Nantucket took pride and did what it could to maintain flat streets and well-kept streets. This plan is a baseline for understanding the future streetscapes as a holistic resource for telling Nantucket's history. But to do so effectively, the streetscape must include accessible details that respect this history. Design within the public realm should not exclude people from services, but necessitate thoughtful and collaborative design processes to ensure historically appropriate accessibility is reached. Thank you again to the project partners, the project team, the public, the Nantucket Community Preservation Committee, and the town for your ongoing support, valuable information, and a passion for historic Nantucket. I'm going to stop share.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I have a comment. Well, first of all, I just want to express deep appreciation to everybody who made this survey. I know there's a lot more that we didn't even hear about, like all of the documentation and the measurement. And I just wanted to encourage you to bring it to some of the other groups in town who have a very direct voice in what happens on the sidewalk. So, you know, working with Holly to talk to Mike Burns about it, the transportation planner, the roads and rights of way committee, but also the planning board. I mean, do you think the planning board would be interested in having a briefing on this? Because they're very close to the decisions of what get made. One, I took a tree tour with the land council this week. I highly recommend it if anybody hasn't done it. And one of the things that they brought up was when we lose one of our big elms, there's a hole. And they have a priority, which is keeping that open so that a tree can be replaced. So there was a big elm on the corner of India and Center Street by the Broadway Hotel, and it's all bricked over now. So I don't know if that can be one of the recommendations or something.
Absolutely. When Dr. Sujin Kim was down, he was actually down right after that storm that knocked over the tree. And so that's the reason we didn't extend our survey further down Center Street, is because the sidewalk was blocked off completely because of the massive hole, but also because I didn't know what was going to happen with it. And so it was kind of this indeterminate item at that time. And so we prioritized scanning that other side of Liberty Street instead of going further down Center. But absolutely, it's definitely one of the recommendations of the report, one of the considerations of the report, to work together with nonprofits such as the Land Bank and Nantucket Land Council and that kind of thing, to talk about these items and what they see as a priority. But also talk to, like you said, the Rights of Way Committee and the other committees and commissions that have direct jurisdiction, to see what they think and what they would like to see as well. So there's definitely a lot of the considerations are for collaboration and just further research.
And Hillary, just as an additional thought on, the loss of a tree and what to do with the planting and the hole in the meantime, Kim mentioned, the possibility for adaptation and mitigation and, green infrastructure in these planting holes until a tree can be replanted. So, there is an opportunity to think about sort of short-term and long-term uses of these tree pits in the situation like that. So.
Clary, so what you're suggesting, you're recommending is keeping the space green as opposed to breaking over and pretending that there wasn't a tree or a
Yep.
green sport.
I think it's always a great idea to remember that permeable surfaces, are really important in this island, and the historic tree placements, and bricks are beautiful, but soil and plants help a lot more with water issues. So maybe there's a great design solution that can be installed temporarily until a new tree can be planted.
Suggestion.
Is there real resistance to taking out bricks to put a tree in? Even if there was a tree there previously, I mean, is there like a commitment, they brick it over? Make it hard to put a tree back?
I'm not sure what the policies are. Holly, do you?
It'd be a question for DPW. I don't know them, what their thought was or what they were. It's probably more of a safety issue, that's why it was bricked over. Right, I honestly. think that's what it was.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure they would fight you putting the tree back. They brick it over for temporary safety.
Yeah.
Bricks are pretty removable.
Sure. There's so little permeable space in downtown. It's, you don't want to see it lost. And there's nothing more permanent than the temporary. It's like when you break something over, there's a chance that it might just remain that way. Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Tom.
I don't have a question, but I would just like to say that being on this board for 5 years, that was probably one of the most professional, well done, and well presented programs I have witnessed here. And I
Aw.
sincerely hope that the boards, commissions, and committees of this town that are going to be looking at this thing really do take it to heart, because it was extremely well done.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I hope so too.
I think we all share that sentiment. Thanks so much, Kimberly, and all who participated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Unless there are any other questions, we'll move on in our agenda. Seeing none, let's go ahead and move on appropriately to the CPC grant application opportunities that we have in September. And the first one on the list is an application for the Main Street Sidewalk Rehabilitation Plan. So this is something that was submitted before, and really is so in line with what we've just been talking about and hearing about. Do we have any news about CPC being able to support that?
I have not spoken to Ken on this. He's kind of doing a hiatus away from town stuff for health reasons. But I don't want to put Ken on the spot.
You can put us on this spot. We can have a
But-
conversation.
So
Yeah.
I will say, so as much to some people might think, the town is quite understanding and knows that the maintenance of our sidewalks and streetscapes and roads in general, especially in the core, are very, very important. And just as recently, I was asked to take a look at Main Street where the free bricks are, because of the sidewalks, those bluestone pavers that have been there for many, many years. And the issues that we've all presented when we were walking around with Matthew Bronski at the time. I met with DPW. We actually had a conversation with Matthew on, trying to look at what we can do more. There, you brought it up, good point of what are the short-term solutions and what are the long-term solutions, and how do you get between point A to point B, making sure that things are done appropriately. And I can say with full confidence that the current DPW staff leadership is on board, of understanding that things need to be done historically appropriate and not be just a hodgepodge of let's just fix it, so to speak. So that's good. So on that note, I guess I'll just hand it over to Secretary.
Sure. So we wrote a grant. Was it last year? It seems like 10 years ago, 2 years ago. Hillary and I partnered on writing a grant for CPC to do a Main Street study. And it was in partnership with Gruner Sampson and also with ICR, a materials conservation firm out of New York City. Part of this project would have been having our program, Dr. Sujin Kim, who does the 3D laser scanning, come in, laser scan, build the model, work with Gruner Sampson to really understand the three-dimensionality of Main Street, of the sidewalks, not just the slope up Main, as we know, but also, as we saw in Kim's presentation, the sectional qualities of how the sidewalks and roads have a camber or a slope to them. And then the next step was looking at the historic precedents and the historic significance and working with the town and other stakeholders to determine options, material replacements, repairs, solutions for examples, just like we've talked about in front of the 3 bricks. We would be absolutely happy to resubmit this grant. I think we need to revise it a bit. We have recently, unfortunately, lost our Dr. Sujin Kim to another university, so we won't have a faculty to do 3D laser scanning right now. But I think we can speak with Gruner Sampson about the digital documentation, and if they're going to be building the model anyway, that might be an efficient method of doing that. And then I think also looking at who our team is, who our stakeholders are, and perhaps revisiting the proposal for what are the town's priorities? What particular areas we might need to schedule for looking at first and addressing first. So I'm happy to sit and kind of work with Holly and whoever else, you know, we need to work with on this to get it in line with what the town needs for the grant.
Thank you.
Yes, my
Uh,
pleasure.
We're happy to help in any way we can.
Terrific.
As I recall from Kim's presentation, it said that the manual sidewalk study took like
Yeah.
3 weeks or whatever.
6 weeks. Yeah.
6 weeks, and the laser took
2 days. That's right.
So I mean, obviously laser sounds more expensive, but to get the 3D mapping and all of that, it would be certainly worth it.
It's
And
absolutely worth it, Clement. It's really, it's not only efficient, it is precise. And when working with this sort of 3-dimensional slope, where you have the slope of Main Street, but then you also have the slope of the sidewalk down to Main Street, and the kind of waves that you see on the sidewalk, I really think the digital documentation and its precision is worth it. Yeah.
I also recall that the reason this grant was denied was because the town said this was their responsibility. and They were going to do it.
So having recently watched it again, I think there was some understandable concern on the part of the CPC committee about whether or not it was responsible and appropriate for them to disperse this tax
Mhm.
revenue to town, to an obligation that should be paid for by the town. And, we know from the policy at the top of the CPC at a state level that, preservation of the sidewalks is not an obligation or a responsibility of the town. It's an opt-in. Building a sidewalk and maintaining it is the responsibility of the town. So, it is permissible for the CPC committee to fund a preservation study and plan and design
Much like the one we
for the
just saw.
sidewalk. Yeah,
Right.
this, something applied and it's, yeah.
And you're absolutely correct. The CPA has definitely funded other municipalities more street walk type of studies.
Yeah.
So it's not just, yeah.
And I think one of the points here, the presentation that Kim just made, this is a great example of what would come out of a Main Street study. You can't preserve something, you can't design something, you can't actually implement a project until you have it documented and fully researched. That's what this grant would offer, much like the work on Winter Liberty and Center Street. So this is a documentation and research. You have to do the historic research to understand what's appropriate, what's significant. The community input was invaluable, I think, and so having the community engagement in this next Main Street project would be invaluable. And these are things that the town, I believe, would need before they would create a response and an implementation.
If I can say something really quick, sorry. Also, part of this project was, and this is one of like the things that is not included in the report, but it's just handed over as part of the deliverables, is a list of recommendations for future research. And so I've identified streets, certain items that may need to be documented, priorities, and that kind of, those kinds of things, in order for something, if like you did go forward with a second grant that was similar to this one, where those priorities could sit. And I think that's deliverable 2.1, I'm not sure. It's in the shared drive. But it was just a document that said, I recommend these streets for these reasons. These items that are on the sidewalks for this reason, such as the bollards, the hitching posts, the carriage stepping stones, that kind of stuff. But also identified streets that are threatened by climate change and sea level rise, and documenting those quickly as a potential priority, depending on where the priorities lie within the town and that kind of stuff. Like I know one of the reasons we did Winter Street was the sewer. And the sewer project that was going to happen and that kind of stuff. And because of that, we found, oh, there's cistern and here's where it's located. And oh, these sidewalks used to be covered completely in asphalt. Before they were then uncovered and the bricks restored. But also doing that research, I even started to look up like the little water medallions that were on that sidewalk. And one of them is from the mid 1800s. And the company no longer exists, but it's still being used as a water access part of the street. And so that document's available and that research is all available to y'all to help guide decisions, whatever happens.
Thank you, Kimberly. So what I'm hearing is documentation is the first step, just as we have a campaign of surveys of those houses to be able to preserve them. And that the town is responsible for the maintenance and the construction, but as far as the plan, that is that's something that the CPC would typically support.
Could.
Yeah.
Has the flag.
And obviously Main Street is top of the list.
And on the topic of CPC, I don't know if anybody was able to watch their last meeting they had, I think it was their end of the fiscal year. They usually have 3 different components of the CPC: preservation, affordable housing, and open space. And they had 3 different organizations talk about what CPC did. And basically at the end of the CPC discussion, there was basically, yes, their application deadline is 4 o'clock in September, I think September 9th. However, they are open to people sending preliminary, this kind of like a notice of intent. This is what we're wanting to do. So I think that's something that I know I would like to do, and maybe we can work on that.
Absolutely.
Kind of just, and I do think, working with PPW on what they think would be helpful, that can also tie into that. But of course, coming from a preservation perspective, and the fact that we have examples of other municipalities within the Commonwealth that have utilized. I mean, that's also another thing. I think CPC, again, I remember when it was gonna go through town meeting, I was a senior in high school, nobody knew exactly what this was. And here I am championing, and I'm not even a taxpayer at the time, for this funding source. And I think there's this misunderstanding that, yes, it could be used for preservation efforts for the town. And also, we know from talking to the state that municipalities have been able to utilize it for a match for other grants and opportunities that are available to us, especially now that we're a CLG. So getting them to understand that, yes, there is a municipal responsibility for maintenance, but at the same time, doing these important plans are
Well, thank you both for working on that and everyone who's participated. And however we can help facilitate or support, please let us know, whether it's having a collaborative meeting in one of these monthly meetings or outside focus group. So please let us know how we can best.
Great, thank you.
The preliminary, which you were talking about, notice of intent, so would that have to be before the September deadline or?
Yes, I mean, basically, they're just saying that if anybody's interested and they want to get an idea, brought to their, yes.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's a thing that other CPAs.
Well, we haven't done it before, but
I know, no, I think it's the first time that Nantucket CPA has been able to say this.
because I think I have to wait, just I'll give a September presentation. Like, so,
It'd be nice to get some sort of preliminary notice, basically, this is what we're wanting to do, and these are the players that are involved, right? This is why.
I think what we could probably do with that is submit the letter of intent fairly early and say, we are going to revise the last application that we submitted based upon conversations with DPW and other, town stakeholders, to really understand current priorities, because it has been 2 years since we submitted previously. So we could definitely probably get that in, end of this month or very early in August, if we can go ahead and set up a meeting to really review the past grant application and see what could be updated.
As we know, those grant applications are they're onerous.
They are onerous. At least we have one already done. So hopefully we can just revise it as we need to.
And
Angus, I've got a question, and this is directed kind of, I guess, at Holly. Holly, you said that you had a meeting in front of the Three Bricks with various department participants in the town. Was there a plan formulated as a result of that meeting? Is there any
Very
direct?
Formal, it was myself, Chuck Larson, who's an engineer from, works with the town, and he works with DPW on projects, and a member from the DPW department. We're pretty much looking at it. They wanted my take because there's people complaining, right, at the end of the day. And again, there's that reactionary thing that the town has to do, but at the same time, where can we be proactive? And that's where I said, why don't we reach out to Matthew, who's been on Nantucket, he's a preservation engineer, which are very rare, and get his take on it. And I think we need to have another meeting on that. Basically, this kind of goes to what's the primary, what's the first goal that we can do, and then this is the long term, short term, long term. And there's also, if you actually are at 99 Main Street and what is the one across the street, 98 Main Street, I think, on the corner, there's a divot in the road. I think everybody drives by it, and you also see some flagstones that were used for a crosswalk. I know that the main flagstone that's on right in front of 99 Main Street is historic. It's very, very old. There's photographic documentation showing that, but I'm not quite sure about the actual crosswalk itself there, because there's another one so those are coming to play. Our immediate thing, as we were standing there, and people, as I knew, driving by, hey, how are you doing? You get clunk, clunk, clunk. Let's remove those now, so that way we can retain them on site, store them on site, and don't get ruined anymore. And what is the, obviously, do work on the streets during the summer. What's a solution? So basically, it was trying to bring it all so far. It wasn't it was let's go take a look at it now, so to speak. So I'm hoping, I gotta touch base back with Chuck and Matthew, but Matthew is going to look at how we can really tackle, and I know from a preservation perspective, we don't want to piecemeal things, but there is a priority on this because of obviously accessibility and historic material that can be ruined. We don't want that to happen. So of course, this has to be a priority, but using the area in front of the Three Bricks where those historic flagstones are, how a plan and action can be done to tackle that now, even though it's piecemeal Main Street. So,
Holly, was Dale Gary
it
there?
wasn't, it was literally just three of us.
Yeah.
Standing out there, I think it was before 4th of July, going, okay, this is, this is something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And people have complaints, so
Yeah.
obviously it's a priority of the town.
So did you get the feeling that this is a project that will proceed on its own, that the town is going to take care of on its own? And the reason I'm asking this is because, we're talking about the sidewalk study for all of town. And that if we were to maybe focus this study on specific, really small specific areas, it might be more palatable and more doable. Now, I don't want to circumvent the current process or not do the whole town, or whichever ones were included, maybe just Main Street. But if this were maybe redirected a little bit and focus maybe just on the Three Bricks or that immediate area, it might be more accomplishable in the short term.
Right, we acknowledge the fact that, because that was one of the questions was, has this been laser scanned? Well, obviously, we knew from this project that was just presented of what was laser scanned. It would be nice, obviously, to have the entire stretch of Main Street laser scanned, but for this immediate issue, let's look right at the 3 bricks and try to tackle it. So I'm glad to hear, Mickey, that you're, I agree with you on as far as having small tangible projects, and maybe that's something that we can look into.
What are the
On
priorities?
what are the priorities, but again, that's why we have plans to triage everything.
Mhm.
Just like our survey plan and master plan, the same type of thing. But having that buy-in, is important, and I, quite frankly, I do feel like we have that. We didn't have.
This is by far the worst section of sidewalk in town. I mean, this needs addressing as soon as possible. So whatever, we can do to enable that.
You're talking about in front of the 3 bricks, Mickey.
Yes.
Yeah, and the street as well is what Holly was talking about. That spot right there is really bad.
It is, I think they're working on a solution now versus what they can do in the winter, because they can't do it right, as we know how busy that section is.
So what the previous grant was for just Main Street, it wasn't all of town, but hopefully it would have been used as a model for the rest of town. Okay. Are there any other comments on that? It sounds like we've got a few.
Well, I have one further
Okay.
comment. I don't mean to belabor this, but to Mickey's point, I think, and Holly's, if we were to tackle that one particular area of the sidewalk and the street, and it went well, I think that would go a long way to convince everybody that, we might actually be onto something here, and the rest of it slowly might be able to get done.
That's right.
That's
Um,
a visible spot.
it's-
I mean, it's a great place to start.
I can't imagine any part of the town or people who use the town not having buy-in to having a street that they're not afraid of losing, life and limb or the bottom of their car. So it's just a matter of making it happen.
Right.
Let's move on to the Jetties Beach Pavilion. Are there any updates?
What I can say, and again, preface this is I'm not a project manager on this project. I am a staff liaison to the overall discussion. This is a Park and Recs project, looking at the concession stand. We've been looking at Jetties Beach and Children's Beach more specifically from a coastal resiliency perspective. Resilient Nantucket, how these sites can be in line with coastal resiliency plan, all these things. And again, at the end of the day, these are 2 historic town-owned structures. So I've been emphasizing the fact that these are eligible for historic tax credits, several rental properties, as well as a lot of other eligibility grants. And we all know that anything that's being done has to follow Secretary of Interior standards. So the consultants that have been working with Park and Rec on this project are well aware of that. And where that stands now is they're going to have a preliminary, it hasn't been scheduled yet, we're working on logistics, but there's gonna be a preliminary because we're dealing with 2 regulatory boards that are gonna have to eventually review, which is the HTC and Concom. So the consultant wants to have a joint meeting. Very basically, this is what we're proposing, this is something, and get their feedback before they actually pull the trigger and move forward. After that, there'll be a meeting with the select board to say, okay, these are the projects we're looking for. And again, having a project, this is where CPC can be a matching portion of the Paul Braun grant with MHC and the National Park Service. And they can have, there's 2 aspects of it. One, it can be for the assessment and documentation of the structure. And a lot of that's already been done, one with PIN. in 2007, and 2 recently as of last year, where students looked at specifically not just the historic resource, but also about climate change, and sea level rise. So all of that, and they met, I remember it was in August last year in the middle of a hot summer. And students met the consultants with Park and Rec, DPW at the pavilion upstairs, mind you. It was really hot. I actually had family down on vacation, so I actually was not working, but I was like, hey, hold on, I gotta go. We're in there. So if, again, there's information that's been utilized. And the other aspect of the Paul Braun is you can also apply for it for the actual preservation park. Myself and Abby have been in some of the National Park Service, so was it a couple months ago? Exactly when? April, yeah, it's around there. The Massachusetts Historical Commission hosted the National Park Service to talk about that. And again, this would be a grant that's eligible for us because A, we're CLG, B, we're the municipality, so we own town and historic. So that's something, and be able to hear that other communities within the Commonwealth have been able to double dip. The CPC is also great to hear. So yes, instead of saying, hey, taxpayers, let's pay for this, well, for this other funding source is available to us.
Is there any way for us to help in this commission?
There will be, just not right this second. There's, logistically, they've been just looking at the site and how that would affect the building. There's phases of it. And I don't know when they plan on doing other things, aspects of it. So where that fits into saying, okay, this date we're gonna apply. Obviously, this commission applying the application on behalf of the town, support letters, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know where that would fit in. And before we even do that, we want to go to CPC first for that matching grant. So CPC would have that.
So is that gonna be a grant for this year's CPC?
It may or may not. Again, it depends on where this whole project lies into the Parks and Rec.
So it's with Parks and Rec.
Yes, again, yes, the Park and Rec plan, but they are well aware of this funding source and the importance of it. Because we're dealing with looking at the main reason why having the 2 regulatory boards look at these potential projects, we're dealing with not only elevating the structure to comply with Secretary of Interior or design guidelines, but we're also talking about elevating the ground itself. There's a couple of options that we've been looking at. Again, these are 2 historic resources. A lot of people don't realize that the little one at Children's Beach is a contributing resource, but it is. So, and getting people to understand what happens if we didn't realize that that's a contributing resource and the potential at the fact that we can have a rehabilitated structure, maybe not with the portalettes that are there, maybe something that's actually incorporated in the building again, following certain. So there's that. But having something that is, reviewed upon by both commissions together, where they have that dialogue with the consultant, and then hopefully the consultant will go back to, maybe the drawing board, not necessarily full drawing board, but like gather the notes and information that's been presented, and then will be a submittal to the select board for public comment.
Holly, a few years ago, the HDC approved a rather inappropriate porch roof onto the Jetties Pavilion.
Yes.
Is that still being considered? That's the question, is that still being considered? And 2, it makes me, it's concerning that the HDC would approve something like that, which would totally change the character of that building. So what is the status of that project?
Well, the HGC approved it, and as you know, COAs are good for 3 years. So, but my understanding is that because again, it's town-owned resource, and the applicant was the renter, the person who has a lease with the town. My understanding is they didn't want to move forward because they didn't want to pay for it. That's what I was told. But again, they still have the COA that's still eligible to be used. So, again, yes, that's kind of plays into this. As we know, historic resources that are owned by the town, they have a competitive bidding process to even be the occupant for that structure. You know, and then it's, okay, you can do X, Y, and Z, and I don't get involved with that, of course, with their own contracts for these individual places, but at the end of the day, the town is responsible to make sure any of the work that's done on that structure is done, you know, accordingly. And again, I want to go, hey, preservation, and that's important, maintenance. So yes, that's another aspect of this, to get the buildings up to par, from a maintenance perspective, preservation perspective, but at the end of the day, also about adapting it appropriately based on our guidelines.
Do we know how old the building is at Children's Beach?
Jetty's Beach Pavilion,
No, just no children's, which is.
1960.
1960.
It's contributing, yes, gotta remember our period of significance goes up to 1975. That's also a misconception. What's that?
About that Surfside building.
That one is not.
Interesting.
Yeah, that one, I think is like late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. And they're not really looking at that site as far as for sea level rise.
Yeah.
Now, obviously erosion at some point down the road. Yeah, absolutely. But they're focused out of the plan with these two. So myself and Vince Murphy have been involved in these. In meetings. with them. I'm just happy to be involved with part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So to follow up on Mickey's point about something that is not appropriate, that has been approved by the HTC. Holly, are you saying that you're, that as it goes through the process for actual implementation, that there would be a further review with preservation, you know, with
Yes.
you and
Yes.
others,
Yes.
so there would be a check and balance so that
Yes.
something that isn't appropriate would
Yes.
actually be constructed. Okay. Well, that's reassuring.
Could you ever get them to rescind, like to revisit could the town revisit the COA? So it's not hanging out there.
I don't know, I mean, quite frankly, it sounded like it was a money thing, for the applicant just didn't want to move forward with it. I mean, I could talk to the agent to see if we can just withdraw it completely, that's a possibility, but
Seems like it could be confusing.
yeah, I mean. It was done like last year. Or a year and a year.
But the closer they get to the expiration of their lease, the less likely they are to want to actually build it.
Right.
They don't even know they'll get the next
Completed.
lease.
Yeah, I really don't.
I just bring it up because it can be very confusing for the select board members because, you know, folks have varying awareness or interest in preservation on the select board, they have different interests and if it does come up and there's the COA out there, it's just confusing.
Yeah,
It's useful to put a note in the record that this was you know, an outcome of a particular circumstance involving an awning. And that there, you know, we have the architectural plans for that Peabody Experience building and that we would hope they would be honored.
I mean, I will say this, you know, I know, and maybe this is kind of towards you on this. I know there are things, quite frankly, you know it as well as I mean, you and I share the same thing. There are things that the HDC will approve, much to our dismay. And I seem to agree. But at the end of the day, they are the regulatory body that make that decision. So with whether we agree with it or not, okay, there it is. The COA for this extension of the pavilion, which it was better than having, you know, the removable one that flew away. But at the end of the day, they approved. Whether it's appropriate, that you think it's appropriate or not, is a different story. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that they're the regulatory board. Here's a COA on board, but it was done under certain circumstances. Because the plans that the consultants are looking at doing is to accommodate elevation, not to do an awning, not to do any of that kind of stuff. So completely different, and yes, to separate the two. But yes, I can find out more about what that means, you know. Anyway, I just wanted to mention, but yes, that is important. It may be brought up. So. Anyway.
Well, it's, you know, it's still concerning that the HTC actually did approve something like that. And I would like to think that if another approach or a plan comes up in the future, that there's a little bit more, you know, some somehow either this body or others can contribute to the understanding of the integrity of that building, and something like that wouldn't happen again. So just a thought going forward, I guess.
Well, I can say this, that the consultants have architects on staff that are working on the proposal that understand Secretary of Interior's interest.
That's it, Weston and Sampson.
Yeah.
And they have a historic preservation group.
They don't have a historic preservation, but they have an architect on the whole project that understands. So,
All right, the next thing up is the seed funding revolving loan fund for preservation.
Yeah.
Maintenance program.
I'll take this one. I mean, I would
Okay.
move it out about questions of eligibility. I spent a lot of time this spring meeting with Ken about talking what is eligible, what's not. And so similar to what Holly mentioned earlier, like the actual work, if we were to like do the loan and someone's doing the preservation work, like CPC can't pay for that. But this is where we would be looking to do a matching grant so that the money would come from that, not the CPC. So the CPC would really be the matching piece of the funding to like do the initial administration setup. And that's what is eligible for CPC funding. So I can work with Holly. We've done a bunch of work on it. I have a bunch of notes from things I did with Ken, similar to what you had mentioned with Ken of doing like a letter of intent. I think we can work on creating a letter of intent and sending it over to them and kind of trying to do that sooner rather than later.
Great.
So I'll take that.
Thank you, Abby.
Okay.
Any other comments on the revolving loan fund? All right, so, and then the Winter Street cobblestone restoration.
So that was part of the bid package that was put on to the sewer force main extension project. And as we know, David Gray is the project manager from the town's perspective for that whole sort of project. I don't know where that is in the queue, so I'd have to ask him on that, but I do feel that that would also be something that we would want to put in a letter of intent on, following what they have put in their bid package, to make sure that that's something that they would want to,
If I could just interject, I have an interest there. I'm involved in another group that's on Winter Street. And David was down there with 2 or 3, I don't know if they were the engineers or who they were, last week at length going over the street. So I guess they're just looking ahead to figure out exactly what they're going to do there. I'll hold that till another time. Thank you.
But with the, if the discussion is about applying for CPC or CPA grant, what would the grant be? What would the application be asking the grant to fund?
good question. I have to look at what exactly it's been, what year since that bid package was attached onto there. I think we may not have to, because a lot of that was also tied in with what Ken and Kim did. Again, that was the whole reason why that they went that direction, which I was very grateful on. That's good. But streets that were gonna be impacted with that project. So that is a good question. I basically, at the end of the day, I need to touch base with David.
I have a question for Holly.
And what that entails.
Because they, the restoration was one of the contingencies in that original bid, right?
So
It's just one of
there were
those.
5 different bid like additions onto the sewer force main project that we all reviewed from section 106.
Right.
And those particular projects, my understanding that the contractor who won the bid said he was gonna do all of them. My understanding, it was either all or none. And that was the case. But again, they're bid packages, so they're addition to the code that it's important, but overall important work for the sewer enforcement project. So again, I don't know where it is in line with their overall project. So it's with-
I have a question for Holly. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but do you know when they're going to take up doing the street? They have to start in the middle of Lily Street next. But when they get up by the junction of North Liberty Street, Lily Street, and Gardner Street, that is going to be a major disruption to the traffic pattern in the town. And I know, and obviously, they're gonna have to wait till after summer, but do you know when that's gonna happen?
I do not know. I have touched base with David. I have not talked to him about these overall projects in quite a while. So, but I want to say there was something put out there, maybe on Facebook or Instagram or something from the town explaining when the next phase was going to be done. Again, I'd ask David. But I wanted to mention about CPC that I am going to be looking into CPC for surveys in general. Because, you know, there are kind of logistics that having our survey work. Because of Nantucket, because of the fact that, you know, at the end of the day, a $40,000 project, you add the two together from the grant that we're getting to what we, the town, is paying, doesn't necessarily do it justice. So there are some things that we want to look into, whether it be CPC to assist in that.
Or the MPP. Like, because remember when we went to that session, they were saying, oh, Bill, you might get more money if you get them matching.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm just thinking about CPC. Basically, at the end of the day, when it comes to our survey work, and again, I know we're all saying what has been done. I mean, I got to show Clary and about the plan and the methodology and just, you know, even though on a weekly basis, I'm having to explain to people that our old 89 surveys, you know, have done us a bad service when it comes to indicating it's contributing or not contributing. People still focus on, oh, it says no contributing, and it's really, it's hard. But that plan, you know, I don't, at the end of the day, I don't think the money is sufficient because of these, and because of how complex our properties are. We've had to do, the first bit of surveying really leaned on a lot of the work that NPT did, that PIN has done over the years, that has documented, and now we're starting to get into areas where there's hardly any surveys done at all, or there's no histories done, and maybe some scattered, you know, NPT marker history. So there's going to be a lot more time for whoever the consultants are, whether it's Cal continuing or the future ones to tie into. So looking at see if CPC would be something to add on to, or at the end of the day, how we as the town who's now get into the money that we've been able to receive back. So those are some things I just wanted to bring to the see what would be the best.
I think it's always better to ask for more money and then have them tell you.
Right.
So Holly, does that mean that for each are you saying that for each individual Form B, the consultant doesn't feel like they have enough money to pay for the time that it takes to get the work done to be meaningful?
There's some kind of there's only so much that you can do from keyboard. There's only so much time that they can do physically on hand. So yes, there are some amount, and whether or not it's saying, you know, 140 surveys for a $40,000 project, we need to bring it down to say 100. I don't know what that would
Straight off.
exactly. What is that treatment? And would it be beneficial for us to have additional money in the pot and say, okay, this is what it's going to help, you know, to do this. Yeah.
Raise my hand. I had a conversation yesterday with Marcia Bader and Betsy Tyler about the work they're doing in Sconset and you know, the challenges with the Form B reviews at state and we were talking and we have talked previously, Holly, about, you know, what is the established methodology going to be for these and establishing a best practice.
Yes.
And I think we have all kind of come to the conclusion that it might be a good thing to have a little working group that discusses best practices, methodology, research resources, what the state is looking for in Form B, and just get it on paper. I know probably from a consultant's point of view, maybe, you know, people don't want to give away their research trade secrets, but you have so many surveys to do that to make it the most efficient, it might be a good idea to have a little working group in PT, Sconset Trust, the town, PAL, Penn, people that have done these surveys and Form Bs to really just streamline the process, the resources, where to start looking. And then obviously, as you get to different neighborhoods and different locations, the resources will diversify and be very much just specific to that place. But at least having kind of a straightforward process outlined might be a really good place to start for the numerous surveys that you've got.
We would appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we would appreciate that as well, because we're really interested in helping out with some of these too. And, you know, the first step for us is just compiling all the knowledge and resources out there. So,
Yeah, kind of going more in depth in what the survey plan has as far as these sources that are just put in there as a boilerplate, but not necessarily will those particular resources be beneficial for sponsors.
right, exactly.
Yeah. But yes, I do think looking at the entire survey from a logistical perspective.
Mhm.
Can I ask a question? So the overall topic here is CPC applications and the historical commission, the CPC applications are competitive in the historic preservation sector because we have so many nonprofits that have historic buildings and they're always applying and the projects are really expensive and I'm just wondering if the historical commission goes to CPC for like, here's 4 different projects that we're interested in. I'm just wondering if that might cause difficulties for them. Like if we might be a category and they're only going to choose one.
Right.
And you know, I've always felt that for the surveys, that's a pretty inexpensive obligation for the town. You know, only but the year that we started the historical commission, the town had given $100,000 to fund historic surveys. I mean, and you can't even spend $100,000 in 1 year on historic surveys. So I don't, I mean, I'm just a guest, but I guess I would put out there and ask the commission to consider. Do we need to decide on one? And which are the best for this year, because it's 60 days away. Looks like that might be a good topic to decide.
And are you suggesting that other entities propose the other CPC grants?
I've always felt that for the surveys, it's just so squarely an obligation of the preservation function in the town. And the state does provide a lot, and that if we need, I think what Holly was saying is that the projects tend to be $40,000 projects and the town is giving half, but really for each of these, but you know, we get a survey plan, right? So we're tackling the things that are recommended in the plan, but then actually to do them right is costing a little bit more than $40,000. And we're only gonna get 20 from the state. So, you know, where if maybe we need to have a budget of 40 and it's a 60,000, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, the survey plan also identifies its funding sources
Yeah,
as part of the overall plan, and CPC was listed as
Sure.
a, you know,
right.
recommended, as well as that public and private partnership that we have with
Yeah.
Wisconsin Trust and NBC, and they do surveys.
And I guess I would say because there's so many things that the town is just flat out not going to fund, but this is something that they are willing to fund, and maybe the first thing should be to ask the department head for more money and tell her why more money is needed. To preserve some of that capacity in this other, CPA fund.
And that's a good point, because we're talking about all these different grant opportunities for CPC. Obviously, the Main Street Sidewalk Rehabilitation Plan, as a partner with him would be like, if you're looking for my opinion on that, it'd be top notch, first one. Really and truly, and then the seed fund, if that's a possibility, maybe just focusing it on those two. In the meantime, these others can be down the road. You do bring up a good point. If the Historical Commission's going, hey, all of a sudden we're coming with all these different things that they may.
Well, and the reality is the other two aren't really owned by us anyway. So,
Right.
we, like, they want to do that separately, but I mean, it sounds like for Jetty, realistically, I doubt they wouldn't be able to have all the parties for this year.
There's
And same thing with Winter Street, I mean, I don't know if they even are considering it for the weekend, so.
and I think those, if this is a way to go. Hit that hurdle at that point. But obviously I want this commission to realize that when it comes to the J speech. And
Yeah.
Children's speech, that preservation is being a part of it, and this commission will be involved with that.
And the Massachusetts Project Fund is perfect for Jetties, the
Yes,
MHCs.
yes.
And then that would require, the advantage of getting money like that involved is that it actually enforces the preservation
Correct.
aspect.
Correct, and that's exactly, yes. Yes, that's number one.
And that's a March deadline, so that gives.
Yeah, I think you said we were gonna apply.
Well, I mean, again, I need to have more of an understanding on where this fits in with their time. Because right now, they're looking at preliminary. They want feedback first.
Yeah.
Tom, I saw your hand go up. Do you still have something?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my question was answered. I just was, I was gonna say, these surveys, I think, is a tool that this town has needed for many, many years. And the fact that we're, leading the charge here to spend the money and get the matching funds from the town for 20 grand is for what we're getting and what the town really needs. It's a really low cost thing.
The cost benefit, it really serves us well to invest in that it's been overdue and now it's happening, which is exciting. We could take a quick poll, but I think everyone's probably shares the same opinion that Holly has, that far and away, our CPC grant or CPA applications would probably be the Main Street rehabilitation above anything else. Is everyone sort of feeling that way?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
think
think we
research
can
submission
continue
too.
to focus on that, and, any other things are important, but I would say a far second from that.
We also have some advanced work for you.
Right. Good start. Yes, so the ongoing program of surveying historic resources. Holly, do you want to?
Yes, so
Take
you all received the second batch. I've shared the commission's comments from the first batch with Al. And they were taken into consideration, and I think you'll probably see some of those comments reflected in some of these. More importantly, on the previous photo, so the 88-89 effort where we said there was a really nice photo that was included with the original survey. Let's utilize that for the survey. So Angus provided us what you saw in the packet, his comments on here, and I guess we'll just go by. And these are ones that you only saw comments for, right? It wasn't all of them.
Yeah, my intention was to send all the ones that had the comments, yeah.
Yep. Which you did. So this is 75. 75 over. And again, I'm gonna not stop praising MPT for their generous support on this effort. We can't do this without them. So here is the architectural description. Remember, we have now one form for all structures on the lot, and then that's why you see all the different NANs. These are old survey numbers that will be remaining with the new information. I think most of your comments were spot on with what I had too, some redundancies about Culver Avenue. And also talking about Nantucket Harbor, not the Atlantic Ocean. Some, I think, cut and paste for things. This is the boilerplate that I wanted. I don't know if everybody realizes, but the bibliography and references that are in here, which are different from what Sconset has, but essentially it comes out of the survey plan. So each one of these surveys will have the same exact bibliography. There may be a couple added onto basically based on that particular information for specific history moments. But here are the photographs, and I want to say all of them received. Historic. And one of the other comments that we had in the past was not only utilizing historic photographs from NHA, anything from the older file. So here's one from the 89 survey, brought over from the original one, but also Sanborn maps. I didn't see many Sanborn maps in here. Here's 73. We've got obviously the daily construction. A lot of information. And, you know, these alterations that they're indicated on here, I think it's fantastic. I don't know if you all remember that I had to vet why Nantucket include windows, or not windows, shingle changes on the roof. And I explained that's something that Nantucket actually, we review that, so it's important. So I was able to convince their MHC on an opinion on that. I guess other locations, other jurisdictions don't do that. Again, we've got the architectural history, historic narrative. You'll see a lot of the, again, boilerplate based on the neighborhood. You're going to see a lot of that historical narrative be the same. A lot of that information again being on provided, very helpful. And Pal was able to use some deep research. This batch. Current photographs. Wall structures upon the lot. Again, same thing, got the old numbers identified. And if you follow Tuesday night special at HTC, you'll hear me reference these old surveys, or new surveys, right? Old photograph from NHA. Again, that was one of our comments about providing some historic context. You can see how the structure has changed or may have not changed over time. 73 was twice, maybe. Try to get to the ones that. Sorry, that's my fault. So this one is Free Walsh, and bungalows, Sears and Roebuck, Craftsman. We had I guess one of the things we've all emphasized is the fact that Brant Point is an area where structures were built specifically for our tourism, our summer visitors, and actually outlining that within the survey.
We talked about major alterations. I believe this one was lifted, wasn't it?
Free Walsh.
Maybe not, but
I think it was recent.
yeah,
but
that's what I wonder. If they might want to know what buildings have been elevated.
Yeah.
For our use in the future. think
Right,
that's
I have been trying for the newer ones.
Yeah.
I've been trying to identify that for them.
Yeah, look at that staircase going up.
Yeah.
And the outdoor shower on the platform.
Nice.
Hmm.
Yeah, which is what we don't like. I'd like to see that. So these guys are comments here. And of course, as so you're all aware why there's no numbers there, these don't have numbers yet, this was never surveyed. With the 89 effort. So that also, you know, understand, you know, we're also not dealing with just existing surveys. Yeah. Oh, the shingle space between them. All right, let's switch to families. I love this one too. They could also. These are those side streets that we really wanted. We're seeing stuff. We're seeing applications and events. So that's important to identify. Same thing, boilerplate. Byron Peas, it's awesome. Nantucket family right there. That history. Again, our bibliography, that's boilerplate out of the plan. Which I think is helpful for future reviews. You're not gonna over right to plan. Current photos. All structured upon the lot, that's. That picture. That might
If
be-
I was MHC, I would not accept that.
No, it's stuff
should.
like this, I think is what I'm gonna have to like double check and, well, I've actually gone out to the sites and see.
As Lucy Dillon is also always out walking, you know, I think. You put out calls for pictures, you need it, we could all help you. No offense to Pal, they watch this
No,
later,
I mean,
but
yeah,
Well, I mean, they're here for one day
Yeah.
and those trucks are there, so what are they gonna do?
So
They can't
there's-
walk onto the driveway.
89 photo. All right, thumbs up, that's good.
You know, it's also really helpful to have these images so that you really know what's visible in the public way.
Absolutely, yeah. That is extremely. helpful.
especially in the winter. Yeah.
Exactly, but they're also not trying to hide it, you know, they're really taking a picture. from
I think that was part of the planning of when they came, is that they wanted to be here before
But
things
it
leaked
is
out.
pretty
Well,
incredible,
also I
Holly,
feel
your
like
point about the cost, because I think, isn't that MHC funding for survey like
Right.
$250?
Just when.
I don't know how they people afford to be a business.
Right, no, and yeah, I have no idea, my understanding is just because their overall project is at, say, a $40,000 project. That's
not-
their project is a lot more than that, so that was, I did have a kind of conversation with Ginny on that, I think.
Or when they come to a community where they don't have the archives like the NHA and PT, I mean, we have given a lot of research over.
Yes.
I don't know how they would.
You guys should be getting a grant for.
Right.
I thought about it. I calculated how much it would have cost.
All right, so much, yeah, there's a lot of word choices, I think is one of our main comments before.
So how many surveys have been submitted, Holly?
They've taken up the 140 and created batches. This first 3 batches, I think our grant will be coming over later and we will be the rest of the.
And everyone you read through and correct.
Yes. Boilerplate again. And maybe to your point, Clary, that's something we, you know, again, I. As a planner, with one plan tackling another, having the bibliography for the entire district, the
Right.
entire National Historic Landmark District.
Right.
There's going to be bibliography, that I'm realizing that we are gonna have to add to for say Tuckernutt and Muskegon. But my point is there's history that's pertaining to that island that's not pertaining to Nantucket. This is, so this boilerplate really needs to have a notion that it's going to be
Well,
updated based on the neighborhood.
Thinking of the different neighborhoods, right? We were talking about the New Guinea survey and, you know, it's a totally different collection of resources
Yes,
added to the larger Nantucket history.
Yeah. Yes, on that note, thank you. Penn is going to be helping on the New Guinea side. So they're gonna be tackling.
we've decided to do this, but we haven't made any plans yet to how we're gonna do this. So it's just the thing that has come up this summer, so. Yeah.
But yes, I mean, again, that's that public and private partnership that I've always said, I've heard say in my entire life, pretty much how important it is, especially with food preparation. So. Main and doors, there's some great photographs. I think these reviews, they really understand, kind of get understanding of what we're looking for. These major alterations, I like how they're listed. I kind of wish that they were, when they're having a date range is more important. Just like, I think that they do have a notation somewhere in a lot of these where they say for specifics. You have to refer to the building file, they can't, review everything. But the fact that they have the social history is included in a lot of this, getting
Fascinating.
people to understand that, yes, this section of the town is not within the OHG, but it's just as important. And I think that's gonna be the overall conversation that we're gonna have as we're serving these other areas that are not the OHG.
What's the source for the major alterations? Did you look at it out of the building file or?
I know that they were here looking at something in the building file, so I would assume them. All right, so we had comments on this one. Yeah, okay, and then, so this is conflicting, yeah.
This
from this came up. Yep.
Question for Jenny. How, I've only heard them saying that we were notified that they were.
Photos again, there's that 89 survey one. Those are helpful. I refer to them a lot, the old photos. This one, $25, which is actually just recently gone to the HTC for a sensitive edition and a little. It was as sensitive as I think it could have been. It was, yeah. Oh, yeah. It needs to be reviewed. I think that was very.
Yeah, sounds like.
Same thing with the they're keeping the garage, which is good, but it's also being brought, there's wetlands there. And those are all of the survey. I'll stop sharing. I guess if anybody, you all have copies of those that Angus provided, if there's anything additional that he's missed or we didn't talk about, please email me and I will make sure that they get into the comments to Val.
Thank you for that, Holly. I've been making comments, but all of you are welcome and encouraged to take a look at these surveys.
Even if you're just another set of eyes to look for word choice, that is helpful.
All right, we're starting to run short on time, so I want to go ahead and move through the rest of our agenda. So as far as the follow-up on the CLG meeting, we had talked in the last meeting about having a focus group to work on the MOU with the HDC. And then also a training session with Jen Doherty. Are there any updates on that?
No, not for me, but on the first topic of having that separate meeting, that might be beneficial for the chairs to reach out to the other chairs of the HDC.
I can do that.
I think that would be beneficial, especially how the vice chair of the HDC is chair of their organizational focus committee, and they've been really the ones that are looking at items that are outside a review of an application. That's not, hearing. So I think that would be best, and then they would bring that to the HDC.
Okay.
Anything that's discussed on.
Sorry, I have just a question, just reaching out to the chairs, made me think of this apropos, just from a, thinking about governance, the chairs, don't they need to reappoint, like, don't they need to vote again? Because it's been more than a year and they had their elections and shouldn't they put that on their agenda to elect?
They did
chair
the
and
last
person?
time around, they haven't this.
That's what I
this time
mean.
around.
It's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's, staff already brought that to their attention.
okay, good. Yeah,
That's typical. They usually within a month or so. Yes, that's been one there.
So I held my public comment at the beginning because I feel like it's more appropriate in this area.
Is
I'll
that,
be on to the second bullet point.
is, as far as the demolition and Jandardi
Yeah.
or
The demolition
Yes.
plan and everything. So there's two situations that are of great concern to preservation that I just wanted to highlight for this commission to comment on and be aware of. So one, we have a house that is a Revolutionary period house that was moved from Sherburne, understood to be really deeply historic in the core historic district. It's on Upper Main Street. And it is currently jacked up on stilts, completely gutted, foundation demolished, chimney torn out, chimney gone. I just don't understand how this is not a demolition. This was applied for as a renovation. It was, I understand that, that you might have to rebuild the foundation of a house. In this case, this house had a Revolutionary period rubble, masonry foundation that was highly visible at the street level because it's half a story above the street, contributing feature of the house. And, I also understand that the HDC can't stop people from changing the interior of the house. But the HDC can think about, and I believe is obligated by our designation. And we don't get to have a historic district just because we wanted it. Like, we get to have a historic district because it's an obligation culturally, nationwide to the historic, to just the law in the Commonwealth and the federal law. So I don't know, I just wanted to put it out to this commission, like, how is this not a demolition?
Well, this is the new standard. I mean, the house on Union Street, they picked up the house, threw it into the backyard, tore out the foundation and put a new foundation. That's the first time I've actually seen the house moved off its site. They moved the house into the backyard. And then they, for the convenience of not having to work underneath the house. I mean, there's a very little being preserved in these houses.
And I don't know the details on that one, George, but in this case of 126 Main Street, which is now maybe 126A, I don't know, maybe its address changed because the law was also divided. The HTC kind of, Holly, you can, I believe they said, okay, you can take out the foundation wall, but you have to put it back to the original materials. Am I correct? Do you remember?
It's such a convoluted, just the whole thing, long review
Very long
process.
review.
It was a very long motion of approval as well, but I don't remember. the facts.
I believe it was to replicate the original materials, not necessarily.
This is not, I'm
But
sorry, this is not okay. These old foundations cannot be replicated and be historic. So I just don't understand how it's not a demolition, and I think it's urgent. The second issue of demolition is,
Well, can to
Yeah.
jump in though, if the topic is if we don't understand if it's demolition or not, maybe it is very timely for us to have this session. Going through exactly what is a demolition and what is not, because maybe it is time for Jen to come and like. We have everyone from the CLG, so the HTC members understand exactly what it is. So that it does become clear, because I mean, you're a member of the public, you don't understand, but I mean, if HGC doesn't understand either, I think that's more concerning, and that's where maybe there just needs to be the education on it. I mean, I think that's the key.
It is, again, I think that's why we feel such an urgency about having this. It, starting with Jen, maybe we need more, but learning more about what are the practices and procedures around demolition.
Yeah.
What is considered a demolition and everything around it, you know, from permitting to implementation.
These are two perfect examples of what Hillary and George are bringing up. Bob Francis's house and the Dunham house. And I agree with everything that's been said here. I mean, I don't understand why they're not considered demolition. I just don't get it.
About the recommendations. I mean, Abby is exactly right in saying it's like one thing for the public to be confused, and it's another thing for the regulatory body to either be confused or just be wrong. So the second demolition that happened is a case up on the bluff. 19th century house, very few of these houses left of these summer cottages. And significant historic information, from my perspective, the HTC turned themselves in not to hear the historic information that was prepared. The case was appealed, and during the appeal period, the owner demolished the house at their own risk anyway. So now the appeal will be of a house that's been demolished, and the recourse is that the owner has to rebuild the house exactly, and through Polly's advocacy, the house was scanned. So we do have that information, but it's not going to be the same. So it's a pyrrhic victory at best. And in this case, the comments that came out of the HGC, that it was more historic to have open space. There was a commissioner who said it's actually more historic to clear this house and have open space. I mean, this is an architectural commission that's there to protect architecture. There were comments like the house that the part of the house that we don't like is an intrusion. I mean, an intrusion, the definition of an intrusion is a new house that's been built that's inappropriate in context. You can never have a historic a house that was constructed during a period contributing to the district, a designated historic period, be considered an intrusion, you know, because you, with your modern standard, find it to be unattractive. There were comments that, you know, ideally this would be rebuilt with a gambrel style that is more consistent with what we expect of a gambrel style today. I mean, it is really for anyone with any education about architectural history to make sure there's clean. So I just, you know, as an outsider here, want to ask whether it's the MHC needs to come and do, you know, education, or if they don't want to come to the table, being the HTC doesn't want to come to, I'm sure they do. I mean, they ask all the time, but if there's some obstacle to getting them to the table, this commission has a responsibility to advocate for responsible stewardship of the historic resources. So I just wanted to say that, get off my soapbox now, but I think that you can advocate and educate, and that if you don't, and these things keep happening, it's a real problem for the integrity of our district and our designation from the Park Service. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I mean, they were open to, at the CLG meeting, they were open to having the session, so I think we should just schedule it. But they didn't, they weren't open to it.
I mean, I do also, and I understand, I think both commissions, you both feel very hard, you know. Respectfully, you both feel very, I guess we need to look at demolitions in general and processes and procedures and all that. I do agree, education is key, you know, you can only, you lead a horse to water, you don't mean they're gonna drink, you only provide so much information and education. With that said, with this being in the middle of the start of our national, our review, our HTC, you know, the National Alliance Federation Commission, it may be it may not come soon enough, but at the same time, maybe premature. I do think this should be something that, when they do their interviews, with the commissions, with the public, that it can be brought up. And that be an issue, because yes, it is something that I think we all feel very, adamant that, you know, there should be some clear policies and procedures. Do I like repeating myself on a daily basis and, not being heard? No, I don't. You know, again, I'm an advocate, just like this commission is, and I tell the general public doesn't mean they're gonna listen. Very the same way. So it's, you know, I feel what you're saying. I do. It might be.
Way for, like, could the HDC at least until this review happens, like, is there a way that maybe they wouldn't do any demolitions in the meantime, because we want to consider it, is it possible to, it seems like you could play around there, yeah, that's a little. Like, if someone was coming with a demolition, like, we pulled it off.
So I think one thing that people need to realize is, and this is kind of with bringing Jen in, is Nantucket doesn't follow the typical demolition delay bylaw like the rest of the Commonwealth does. Two municipalities out of the entire state, which is us and Beacon Hill, have our special act. What the education needs to come from is the fact that our historic district has the utmost authority when it comes to demolition. They don't, there's other commissions in this, I know for a fact, there's other commissions in this Commonwealth that would love to have what we do. No question. So again, it's where that level of education is really going to come from the state, where everybody else follows Massachusetts general law. That's what you see. So,
Could I respectfully and humbly, there's no way to ask the HTC not to consider demolitions. They have a statutory obligation to consider anything that comes before them. And the best they could do is deny it, but if they didn't have a reason to deny it, like, they can't just deny it because they're misconstrued, like, they have to deal with it. And I think what this commission can do, I mean, as far as our special act, they have the right to block demolitions, and they have an obligation to consider not just what they think, but stuff that's actually grounded in fact. And if they're not hearing or following the instructions of their staff routinely, I think that actually forms the basis of our, like, habitually arbitrary decision making. Because the only person at the table with the ATC who has a degree in preservation is Holly Baptist, and who, you know, has a degree in architectural history is Holly Baptist. So, you know, we have some identifiable problems, and we have this wonderful opportunity, which is a review by knowledgeable people who are accredited. And I think this commission, instead of, you know, you're going to be able to have a voice in the review as, you know, with members of the public and Cleary and NPT, but to have a recommendation, a written recommendation that is a formulated point of view with specific examples, you know, because this commission that comes in, NACP, like, they'll be given a lot of information. But everybody in this room actually knows, like, what George brought up or what I'm bringing up, and Holly can probably, and I'm seeing, and the Wisconsin Trust can probably name many more. But I think having specific recommendations to hand over to this consultant and say, please consider this in your recommendation, I think that could be very helpful.
Well, there's one thing to consider, though. We do remember last year, the town came and asked us to weigh in on HTC applications from a preservation perspective, and we said no.
So
So,
that's really, if I could challenge that, because I did hear you say that at the last meeting, the town was trying to, the town was supporting the view that the Historic Structures Advisory Board be disbanded, and supporting the view that it was not legally constituted. The HDC and the NAC were asking that the select board use their appointing authority to form those boards, And the select board was saying, well, maybe we don't need to because the historical commission could take over the architectural review role of the Historic Structures Advisory Board. So this commission never said, no, we don't want a role in designating historic structures. What this commission said is, this commission is not appointed to do architectural review of historic structures. And it is far better for the select board to appoint the Historic Structures Advisory Group, which is still meeting, to have an official role, and that's what everybody is asking for. So I think this commission, I mean, I can't speak for the commission, but if there was something like, could you weigh in on if it's a contributing structure that should not be demolished? I think this commission would say, yes.
Absolutely.
But if it's like, can you meet every week to say if this dormer on this historic structure is correct? And that's really not what this commission is designed to do, and it wouldn't be appropriate because that's an architectural review, not a designation in a survey and a planning job.
And I do agree with, and I think that it's something that, again, we more emphasized and brought up with our independent review. And quite frankly, I honestly, I don't think Jen wants to step in, Jen being our CLG consultant at the state side. She's the one that does all the education component. I don't think she wants to step in to deal with her. So I would say that would be something that should be brought up. The NAPC has already met with them. They're gonna have boots on the ground in October, but there's gonna be a lot of things they need to do between now and then. One of those things is interview key stakeholders. Well, this commission is a key stakeholder. Everybody's sitting at the table are key stakeholders. So again, this is something that should be brought up. And they I don't know when they're actually going to be communicating with everybody. Again, we just had an initial, I just sent them a whole bunch of information. So we shall see. It would be between now and October when you're here on the ground for, yes. So they got the next couple months of doing a lot of research, interviewing people that.
Who is it, Lisa Gray?
She is one of the people.
Well, it's sad to witness the loss of historic material just because of a lack of understanding or will of the regulatory board. And so it's, I think everyone feels a real sense of urgency, and October seems like a long way away. How many demolitions are going to be approved between now and then is a concern. So if the HDC wanted the education, and we certainly want it. I think if Jen had that sort of feedback, she would probably be more apt to come. So if there's a way of taking the temperature of the HDC on this issue, I think we could possibly move this forward sooner than later, so that when the consultant finishes their work, everyone has more education of what is typical.
Sorry. I just found out on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, honey, I missed that one.
John McLaughlin passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh,
Sorry. I was just mentioning your. I am still, again, concerned about having this be brought up in between. I think it should be brought up as a concern from both, because we know both commissions are concerned. But it should be brought up through all the different stakeholder conversations that NAPC is going to have, instead of actually asking Jen to be involved now and later.
Well, there are gonna be a bunch of recommendations, right? The consultant comes, they know what they're talking about, and it seems like maybe the time for this is past. But there's a tremendous amount of knowledge at this table here, and a question open to give feedback. So maybe the thing is, maybe there's something else that could be just to put things, to make sure that the things that need to happen do happen.
We've reached the end of our time. Does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Tom. Second, Clement. All in favor, George? Vicky,
Aye.
Abby,
Aye.
Rita? Tom, on your
Aye.
motion?
Yeah.
And I as well.